We appreciate you sticking with us. This is going to be the last presentation in this room for the day. So, feel free to spend the rest of the afternoon with us, or take a break and get some food. But, this is the presentation back, and everybody should be present for. This is, once again, Harold Adams, who presented to us earlier today the sexual politics of meat and why it's irrelevant in 2018. This presentation is about Harold's latest book, Protest Kitchen, which I think a lot of us are going to be interested in, because we are going to be talking about really the nature of protest and where it begins, and and so many of the issues that are present for us today, and how we can fight against them in an integrated and sensitive way to multiple communities. So I'm not going to do a big, long, heartfelt introduction like I did the first time, because I felt like I was fangirling and gushing so much. But Carol is one of my favorite people in the world, and I feel like I'm really honored that she's able to come here and talk to you all today. You all are going to learn a tremendous amount this afternoon. Thank you again. Carol, please.
So I just want to say there are two kinds of people in the world. People who understand I'm not wearing mismatched shoes, and people who think I'm wearing mismatched shoes. So it's okay to come up and get close and personal later and see which side you're on. Hint, it has to do with writing. I just want to thank Christopher Sebastian and the London Veg Fest organizers for creating this space and this room, and I hope that it's a space where you all feel safe to explore some of the social justice issues that are at the heart of veganism. And I'm honored to be a part of it for this day. I do not usually do this many talks in a day, and I've been fortified with good vegan food by someone who was assigned to help me get good vegan food, and I've just had a little sugar, so I should be fine. If I was looking for a soundbite about Protest Kitchen, it's the progressive case for veganism. Or it's that book you want to give everybody who's making you so frustrated, who care about social justice and they don't get veganism. So it's that dialogue between social justice and veganism that just seemed urgently necessary in the light of developments in Europe and the US especially. So we wrote it to help vegans interpret the social justice impact and vision of veganism, and to help those who are protesting regressive politics to understand how veganism is a part of the resistance. So it represents this dialogue. And we included great recipes to help people incorporate more vegan foods into their daily lives. In November 2016, this terrible thing happened in the United States. For those of you who don't, I was at Hamilton last night, and I had to help somebody take a photo because they were failing at a selfie, and I said, so what do you learn about American history at British public schools? And he said, well, the first act was it. The first act of Hamilton was the extent of American history, sorry. But what you need to know about Trump's election is it's a result of the Electoral College, which is an undemocratic aspect of the election, and it was put in place by the slave states of the South. And so it is a holdover from an oppressive time, and that's the only reason Trump is president, is because of the Electoral College. He lost by 3 million votes. But anyway, so when I say win, I don't really mean win. I had a terrible November. I was in a constant state of shock. This is supposed to be funny. It's okay, that's me in a constant state of shock. What could I do? I was just one person, one small person. And then I realized, and if you were here earlier at my other talk, I realized we needed to write a book called The Anti-Trump Diet. And that this would kind of make this progressive case for veganism, for everybody who is anti-Trump. One of the things was that it went off to the publishers. We had an agent, and it went to the publishers, And for the first time, the publisher's optimism caused it to be turned down because they all said, Trump's not going to be here that long. You know, and I had said, well, then we can do an anti-Pence diet. But what they were saying really was, you're not just talking about Trump. You're talking about the rise of right-wing regressive attitudes. You're talking about things that are happening in England, in Great Britain with Brexit. You're talking about the xenophobia in Europe. So don't call it by something that is too limiting. And so Protest Kitchen was born. So it's a progressive case for veganism. It said, we talk about think globally, act locally. Well, an example of this is, perhaps you read, that the first thing Trump did when he was inaugurated was to issue this terrible immigration restriction that influenced 6 Muslim countries, but not the one that he had hotels in. And many of us mobilized and we went to airports, whatever airport we were near. These are photographs from the DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, which is where I am. Anyway, think globally, act locally. We didn't all go to Kennedy. We didn't all go to Washington Reagan. We went to our local airports to protest. So we were thinking globally. I love this one. I'm one of 65,844,610 against Trump. We were thinking globally, but we acted locally. It was, oh, that's right, I don't think we have sound. This is part of our protest. I don't think you can hear it. Veganism is one way of thinking globally and acting locally. Just like people in New York went to JFK and people in San Francisco went to SFO, with veganism, we think locally, but we act locally. There are global issues, misogyny, racism, white supremacy, xenophobia, environmental destruction, and climate change, and being for food justice and compassion. So veganism is one of our local responses. How we eat provides a way to make positive change. So one of the things we wanted to do in the book, and we do start with a sort of U.S. perspective, but I don't think it's limited to that. Shortly before the presidential election, polling revealed that 2/3 of Republicans and a slim majority of independents wanted to return to the 1950s. I don't know what the 1950s completely were like here in the UK, though I do suspect it was probably less encouraging of racial diversity, more assumptions about women's place being in the home. Those were things that were certainly true in the US. It was a very bad time for gays and lesbians. They could be kicked out of the government because it was thought that they were susceptible to being held for being blackmailed by Russia. So they were seen as more dangerous than communists during the communist scare. The women couldn't be on juries. Women lost the daycares and centers that they had been given during World War II so that they could work for the war effort. And there was this real retrenchment of rights. So to Trump supporters, the 1950s offered a picture of family and political stability, accompanied by economic growth and prosperity. But that was only true for white men. Some women may have preferred to keep working, but they lost their daycare. And the real 1950s in the U.S. involved what were called Jim Crow laws, terrible, apartheid like laws, and the civil rights movement was seeing some of their activists being killed. Blacks who tried to enter the suburbs were often physically threatened, or fires were sent near their house. There was a lot of terrorism against integrated housing. Migrant laborers of Mesoamerican descent labored in fields, planting and harvesting crops. There was no health insurance, and they lived in substandard housing. Nostalgia, this was the 1950s, but nostalgia often conjures up images of family meals. In the US in the 1950s, and I think this has had a real impact throughout the world, many of these meals were organized or built around what were called the 4 basic food groups. That was adopted in 1956. Look at these. 2 of the 4 basic food groups were meat and dairy, animal products. So I think one reason so many people from that generation say, well, what do you eat? It's because of this propaganda. This was state propaganda. Even when my kids were in elementary school, the nutritional information they got was supplied by the Dairy Council. So propaganda was allowed into public schools. This reinforced the notion that you needed animal protein for food. But in fact, the real American food, the Mesoamerican food, would never have had cows, because cows were imported to, or were brought to what's now known, the land that's known as the United States, by the British and by the Spanish. The Spanish brought cows that were down in Mexico and Texas. Those are the longhorns. And the British brought cows to New England and the Virginia area. And the presence of these cows changed how Native Americans could farm, because cows were always getting loose and trampling their plantings, which they did not usually enclose. So there was no cheese for Mesoamerican cooking. Now, if you ask for a Mexican plate, you're going to get a lot of cheese and you might get beef. But that would not have been part of the original diet. So when people say, oh, the American diet is this, they're really talking about the past 150 years. Staples, depending on the region, were beans, corn, squash, potatoes, wild greens, nopales, that's prickly pear cactus, fresh fruit, nuts, and seeds. So as I said, importantly, her diet did not include dairy foods at all. And this was true of many diets around the world. I mentioned earlier that the ability to drink large amounts of milk is mostly a Northern European trait. But it wasn't until the 1970s that medical experts recognized that some people had a reduced ability to digest the milk, sugar, lactose. Though there's now studies that show that some of the people who owned people as property, owned slaves, realized that the slaves were not digesting dairy milk well, and were recording that in their diaries from the 1850s. That now they're looking back at these primary sources and finding that it was obvious, even back then, of course, they wanted to maximize everything they're getting from the enslaved people. Nearly all Asians and Native Americans and a majority of African Americans, Mexican Americans, and Ashkenazi Jews have a limited ability to digest the sugar in milk to some degree. So the inclusion of dairy foods in American food guides is based on dietary habits and the physiology of Northern Europeans. It's a racist nutritional policy. I showed this morning, but it's not surprising that some alt-right groups view milk drinking as a sign of superiority. This one was so awful. That the governor of Illinois drank chocolate milk to demonstrate he was committed to racial diversity. Welcome to our world. As traditional patterns of indigenous people were pushed aside in favor of a meat-centric diet, the demand for meat and dairy foods grew. But it wasn't until the middle of the 20th century that these efforts accelerated to produce factory farming. This reduced the amount of land needed to grow animals and eventually required less labor. So animals were brought in from the pasture and crowded together in warehouse-like buildings. So I just want to say, the one thing that's continuous from the 50s, this nostalgic time, isn't the social attitudes, it's the meat and dairy consumption. That's what's continuous to now, and makes it seem like it's a permanent part of our diet, when it's all really recent. And I mentioned Ruth Harrison in the panel discussion, but Ruth Harrison in '64 begins to expose factory farms. And her work, people in England thought it was going to be the next Rachel Carson. Oh my God, I'm blocking on Rachel Carson's book. Yeah, that's, yes. That it would be the next environmental book, but there was such a pushback. I mean, there's now a debate or research being done to show how she did have some effects. But as early as '64, this was being named in England. So as we know, this new approach to producing meat, eggs, and dairy products has resulted in an assault on animal welfare as well as on the environment. But the most consistent change associated with the 50s that is carried into the present is this consumption of meat and dairy. So we devoted a chapter to climate change. Climate change and repercussions warming has repercussions all over the world. And I have a conversation with people who I think really care about social justice issues now, and they'll talk about, oh, but veganism is so expensive, and I'll say, so you don't mind that by buying a hamburger, you are supporting climate change, you're supporting making people who are very vulnerable and live in poverty situations more likely to be flooded out of their homes. This is what you're not paying for the repercussions of your own meals. So climate change, we know, directly affects animals. There's some really frightening studies about that now. And if you are on Twitter, you can stay up to date on it. But we also know how much climate change is a human rights issue. See more, liberals, conservatives, people who care about social justice, that climate change is a human rights issue. People in the world's poorest countries are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, including rising sea levels, natural disasters, food insecurity, and infectious disease. Changing rainfall patterns can affect water supplies and water safety. More than half of the world's population depends on glacier melt or snow melt for water. So as higher temperatures reduce glacier mass and cause more rain and snow, this resource will dwindle. Climate change also affects crop yields. In coastal regions, rising sea levels can result in flooding, which contaminates drinking water and also creates breeding grounds for insects like mosquitoes that transmit malaria and dengue fever. Poor water quality leads to diarrhea, which kills more than 500,000 children every year. Because food production requires fossil fuels, water, and land, food choices represent a powerful way to impact global warming and climate change. So I'm sure you've all heard of being a protein, how Francis Moore Lappé coined the term protein factory in reverse, and that's because the protein in the grains and beans we feed animals is much greater than the meat that comes from the animals. For every 16 pounds of grain and soy fed to beef cattle in the United States, we get back 1 pound of meat. But in terms of nutrition, we reclaim just 5% of the calories and 12% of the protein that's fed to the cow, according to her calculations. While the numbers are less dramatic for poultry, milk, and eggs, the relationship holds. Feeding protein and calories to farmed animals is an inefficient use of these resources. This happens because calories and protein fed to animals don't all go toward the production of muscle, which is what humans end up eating. Much of it is used for energy by the animal or to make some part of the body that we don't eat. It's wasteful, which would be bad enough, but what makes it worse is the effect on the planet and on global warming when resources are poured into producing grain and soybeans to feed farmed animals. If we simply ate the grains and beans ourselves, we'd need to grow far less of these crops and would save both water and energy. You know, people, during the drought in California, people said, yes, but the almonds. Now they say, yes, but the soy in the Amazon. The soy in the Amazon isn't going to people. The soy in the Amazon is going to animals. Animals bred for food generate 1.4 billion tons of waste per year, or more than 5 tons of waste for every U.S. citizen. I don't know, but I'm sure if we look, we can find the statistics for Great Britain. So the farms also contribute to global warming through greenhouse gas emissions that include carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel use on the farm or in the supply chain, nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer application, and methane emissions from the animals themselves. Often when you're looking at statistics about climate change, you need to look at what is the amount of time that's calculated. It's usually calculated for 100 years. But methane disappears into the air within 20 years. So a calculation that actually recognizes the impact of methane shows that animal agriculture actually has a greater impact than the 100-year calculations that are often used. So, you know, President Trump wants to withdraw or not participate in the Paris Accords, but what I say to non-vegans, no matter what our government does, every day, progressives and liberals withdraw from climate accords by eating animals, dairy, and eggs. No matter what your government is doing, are you participating in those climate accords? Are you recognizing what climate change is, or are you not? And I mentioned this, one common misconception is we should stop eating foods made from soybeans. But the tofu and veggie burgers you eat have nothing to do with the Amazon rainforest, other than the fact that they may help preserve it. When we consider the protein factory in reverse scenario, it makes sense the way to protect the rainforest is to eat soybeans and other plant foods directly instead of eating the animals who eat the beans. Researchers who studied environmental impacts of different types of diets found that meat eaters' diets require nearly 3 times more water and 13 times more fertilizer than vegetarian diets. So diets that include meat versus vegan or vegetarian diets, I think this is remarkable. Because they are rich in protein and have a small carbon footprint, meals built around beans represent a remarkable response to global climate change. Not only do beans take less from the earth, but by fixing nitrogen in the soil, they give back to the earth what other crops deplete. Even foods that involve some processing, like soy milk, tofu, and veggie burgers, produce far fewer greenhouse gases than comparable animal foods. So, people who eat meat and dairy are taking up more climate space than vegans. Many of us are in the uniquely privileged position of being able to choose what we will eat, something that is certainly not an option for much of the world's population. Because the impacts of our habits are felt around the world and the impacts of climate change affect the world's poorest people who have the fewest resources to respond, this privilege presents us with a powerful choice. We have the opportunity to consume in a way that lightens the burden of global warming on the rest of the planet. Moving toward a more plant-based diet is also a way of voicing our resistance to a political system that denies human contributions to climate change and refuses to address it. Then we consider food justice. Food justice means the availability of healthy and culturally appropriate food, working against food-driven climate change, boycotting worker exploitation, and creating local community-based solutions. The world's least food-secure populations are also those disproportionately harmed by climate-related events such as droughts, hurricanes, tsunamis, and flooding. Factory farms are often located near low-income communities where people suffer from pollution from those farms, making those farm outputs a justice issue. Food justice also means protecting workers. In the U.S., at least, slaughterhouse work is physically dangerous and also dangerous to mental well-being. But there are also challenges to justice in the production of plant foods. The use of child slaves on cocoa farms in West Africa, for example, mean that we need to pay attention to the source of chocolate we eat. And there is an app from the Food Empowerment Project that will guide you in what chocolate comes from child labor and what chocolate is truly justice-oriented. The cheapness of meat and dairy is often put forth against veganism, but what makes meat and dairy cheap? People are supporting slaughterhouses, they're speeding up the slaughter line. If people are happy that slaughterhouse workers have the most dangerous job in the world, sure, go ahead and eat a cheap burger. But if you're not happy about that, then don't. Choosing vegan foods isn't enough to promote food justice, but it's an important step because it represents a shift in the way most people think about food. That is, when you start exploring all the impacts of a vegan diet, it becomes clear that eating is an act that is about far more than personal health or pleasure. Many vegans have discovered that their new appreciation for the power of food choices has led them to become more involved in local food justice efforts. One of the food justice workers we highlight in our chapter is Brenda Sanders from Baltimore. I had the unique privilege of being in Baltimore earlier this month for the opening of their new restaurant, which is in an area that Brenda's been working in for many years. She's been educating and presenting delicious food for this community for quite a while, and now she wants to make plant food available in an inexpensive way. This is her cheesesteak. I ate it. It was great. My son's got the barbecue seitan wings, and a friend got her pulled pork. They were all delicious. As she said to me, if it's not the best, why am I making it? You know, it was really the best. But no wonder we look so happy. Making reasonably priced, healthy food accessible to one's community is really important, and it was good. Unethical practices are the hallmarks of historic protest kitchens. Animal agriculture and misogyny. So we do have a short chapter on that. This was interesting too. If you were at my earlier talk, I wanted to call it the anti-Me Too movement, the chapter. And the publisher was a little hesitant because they didn't know how long the Me Too movement was going to stay strong. And look at this year. I mean, it's incredible. Animal agriculture is a major vehicle for maintaining and disseminating misogynistic attitudes. There could be no meat, dairy, or eggs without continuous reproductive exploitation. The ongoing reproductive exploitation that undergirds animal agriculture requires misogynistic views. Misogyny exists in every aspect of meat and dairy and egg production, and that's why I call it the anti-Me Too movement, and that our bodies are still a battleground. As I said, meat advertisements suggest that animals desire their fate as edible, using images and language to represent this desire as sexual. In doing so, the advertisements maintain a framework that legitimates viewing women and animals as sexually consumable. I'm retreading some of this from this morning, but it's important to recognize that women too are reduced body parts, especially in political discourse, if there are threatening powerful women. One way to weaken their power is to imply that they're just body parts, because body parts don't have a voice. And that one of the challenges for prosecuting rapists is that consent is determined from the point of view of the rapist, not the rape victim. So these kind of images and memes that says chicken permission, yes, sure, go ahead, are ways of not just reassuring meat eaters it's okay to eat meat, but participating in rape culture. This is an ice cream place that opened in New Jersey called Dairy Air, because they were putting some nitrogen in and making the ice cream. All of their flavors had things like backside banana split, sweet cheeks and chocolate, spanking strawberry moon. And all, when they opened, you could see all these pictures of people with their kids, just standing in front of this image of a cow who clearly is saying she wants it. A conversation about female sexual availability and reproductive control has been going on for decades, unobserved by the average person. Animal agriculture could not exist if it didn't control female bodies and reproductive cycles. If misogyny nests in attitudes about meat consumption, it's given free rein in these attitudes. Although all animal agriculture is built around exploitation of female reproduction, the practices are most obvious and unceasing on hog, egg, and dairy farms. Female animals are forced to spend their lives producing babies, milk, and eggs solely for human consumption. And then they do so until they're too worn out or sick to be profitable, then they're sent to slaughter. Then we look at the whole issue of social oppression and animality. Animality is a potent weapon when used to disempower individuals, ethnic groups, and races. It refers to a quality or nature associated with animals. When human and animal are viewed as opposites, animality becomes a potential slur against humans and is such a tool for social oppression. It offers oppression and alibi, allowing us to exclude any beings deemed animals from moral consideration. Social oppression leverages animality against targeted groups of humans and uses that association to justify their disenfranchisement. So African Americans or British let's see, what are blacks called in Britain? Afro-British, or Afro-Caribbean, Afro-British. If they're called animals or groups, that's a way of doubling the oppression because it's equating race and animality together. We use animality against animals all the time. So we don't just take animality and use it to hurt humans. That notion of animality, of this flattened thing, of whatever's alien to who we are as humans, is used against animals as well. Flattening their diversity into stereotypes, failing to recognize their cognitive abilities, and denying their social nature and social affiliations. One reason animality makes for such a potent resource for social oppression is because all around us is proof of how easy it is to debase the animal, especially in agriculture, but also in entertainment and research. Focusing on how different animals are from us allows us to use them as we want. Even though we've often forget, we humans are animals too. Humans have long underestimated animals, who like the crow who makes tools, or the two former circus elephants who recognized each other after more than 20 years when they were reunited at a sanctuary. We don't want to see, we then say that animals are like humans. What if humans are like animals? We are animals. What if affiliation of the goose was the original monogamy? Not whatever monogamy we end up with in the human species. What if loyalty or altruistic acts are those that we find between species? And we think they're imitating us when we might actually be imitating them. But animality keeps us from identifying with or sympathizing with other animals, and it keeps us from identifying with or sympathizing with other humans when we animalize them or view them as less than human. Racist white supremacist views depict people of color as immigrants and animals. So animals is used to disenfranchise humans. The language of the right equates oppressed human groups with animals. You don't want to know it all, but boy, Trump, he just uses animal language all the time. I guess it's predicted. So, as they worked for their enfranchisement in the 19th century, some white middle-class women allowed animality to function on their behalf. So they sought to parse, in the United States, the Constitution to include them but exclude others. They claimed to paraphrase them, we aren't the animals, we're the pure, we're the educated, we aren't the dirty immigrant, the illiterate freed slave. So they still used animality, even when animality had been used against them. If the way to keep those viewed as different and undesirable is a process of dehumanizing through animalizing, where does that leave the animals? We can stop animalizing other humans, pulling them away from the barrier that divides us from non-human animals. But that still leaves animals sitting solidly on the other side of the line, To say that we aren't animals as an argument for respect and inclusion sanctions animality as a force for exclusion. Compassion. I mentioned this earlier. But I think that at its heart, veganism is about compassion. This is why I think you cannot be pro-Trump and a vegan. You could be plant-based and pro-Trump, but that's something else. Compassion means asking another, what are you going through, and waiting to hear the answer. And the answer doesn't have to be in words. A cow trotting after her calf who's been separated from her is telling us what she's going through. We don't need words for that. A sow uncomfortable in a gestation crate who tries to move is telling us what she's going through. I think this is at the heart of veganism, being open and sympathetic. Research suggests that compassion grows when you believe you can make a difference. Veganism offers us one place to start since compassion is at the center of vegan practice. Through daily tasks of cooking, shopping, and even cleaning, we express compassion by the choices we make. While a vegan ethic may focus on animals, it can't logically exist without a broader viewpoint that includes all humans, indeed everyone worthy of regard. So this kind of veganism holds compassion at its center and extends hospitality to all. So for instance, you can't be xenophobic and a vegan, because vegan is about compassion and xenophobia is about resisting or refusing hospitality. The dictionary defines hospitality as the friendly reception and treatment of guests or strangers. In contrast, xenophobia, or fear of the stranger, perceives only differences, particularly racial and ethnic differences. With compassion as its ethical core, veganism includes a challenge to xenophobia. Within the ethics of veganism resides the practice of removing barriers of otherness and viewing all beings with respect. Of being the author of The Sexual Politics of Meat. Guess what I have succeeded at most of all? You'll never guess. I've succeeded at getting people concerned about the homeless. Oh, you wrote a book, The Sexual Politics of Meat? What about the homeless? It's like such a knee-jerk thing. What about battered women? It might not matter that I was working, I started a battered women's shelter, or that my partner worked with the homeless, or that I took 400 servings of a vegan kung pao chicken once a month. I wasn't going to argue that. It was that you try to situate animals as beings of care and seem as though you don't care about humans. Because the either or of our world is already operating there. But how do we undo it? Here are the answers we've given in Protest Kitchen. Oh, you can't see it very well. Well, don't try to read it for your eyesight. Compassion isn't divisible. It's not either or. Care is about relationships. How we relate to animals doesn't preclude us from relating to humans with compassion. I mean, this all makes sense to us. It's just, for someone who's making this argument has suddenly discovered moral guilt, moral dilemma, and they want you to solve it by being even more morally guilty because you don't care about something. What is happening to animals contributes to human suffering. 4, animal suffering matters itself as a moral wrong. 5, some people have excellent skills in helping people and others in caring for animals. We don't ask vets why they aren't brain surgeons. We accept that care for animals is needed. 6, caring for animals reminds us that suffering is often not verbal. 7, in caring about animals, we learn of ways to approach rigid hierarchies of human society. 8, ask yourself who benefits when those struggling for a better society end up fighting with each other. And 9, and this one should almost be first, people asking that question assume the homeless don't care about animals. Homeless don't enter shelters because they have animals with them. battered women were not going to shelters in the United States for decades because they would have to leave the animals. The very people who supposedly we don't care about animals, which is part of the whole issue with reducing compassion to some sort of divisible thing, some hierarchy. Mary Midgley, who just died, this wonderful British philosopher, she talked about two different ways of thinking about compassion and relationship and ethical care. One were concentric circles. Here's me, you know, and here's my kids, here's my sister, here's my village. Everything's a concentric circle. It's limited. It can't move. And she suggested a very organic sense of petals, where that takes away the hierarchy. So, first steps towards a vegan diet. This is revolutionary or radical, because we're in the radical vegan room. It might be to leave the flesh of birds and fish off your plate. Some argue that it's leaving dairy and eggs off your plate. But, and I won't go into it, I'm sure you all know that how chickens live is a terrible life. And for fish, I was just asked this, a couple weeks ago, what about fishes? Well, fishes are drowning in our air. When you think about what drowning is, if you've ever had that feeling of being underwater and needing air, every dead fish is a traumatized fish. To have compassion for fishes who, you know, they're called cold-blooded, and yet we fail them by not recognizing what they suffered. So, while all vegan choices matter, this represents a way to have a large impact on animal suffering. Veganism, modern chicken production is the single most severe systematic example of humans' inhumanity to another sentient being, said Dr. John Webster. Veganism is a response to information about the lives of animals in agriculture, research, and entertainment. The sheer volume of suffering is overwhelming. How do you stay focused and determined without becoming overwhelmed and stressed? How do you avoid burnout or the blues when the news is so depressing? Because despite the popularity of a meme, you can fight for justice while protecting your mental health. So watch your diet of news. Staying informed doesn't have to mean overwhelming yourself with upsetting news. It's important to know what's happening to animals and to humans in the world, but it doesn't mean you need to read stories about this or see photos of horrible conditions all day long. And guess what's really helpful when you're feeling stressed? A vegan diet. A vegan diet can help in protecting mental well-being. There's a growing body of evidence to suggest that food choices can directly impact feelings of depression and anxiety. The evidence points to the protective effects of plant foods that sit at the center of these eating patterns. Fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds, healthy fats, tea and red wine, and fiber-rich foods. Stress and depression are both linked to systemic inflammation. And we have a whole chapter on this, so I won't go into it. Ginny, my co-author, is a really incredible, internationally respected vegan nutritionist. But it's believed that there's a kind of inflammation that is related to stress and depression. And this inflammation, it's not like a swollen ankle. It's believed to be an underlying factor in heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and Alzheimer's disease. Its relationship to depression, stress, and anxiety seems to be a two-way street. Being depressed or chronically anxious can raise levels of inflammation, which may be one reason why depression raises the risk for heart disease and diabetes. But inflammation may also be an underlying cause of depression. Many of the lifestyle habits that are effective in reducing symptoms of depression and anxiety, like meditation and exercise, happen to also reduce inflammation. But you can also reduce inflammation by eating plenty of fruits and vegetables, healthy carbs, like sweet potatoes and beans, and healthy fats like nuts, olive oil, and avocado. Brightly cooked fruits and vegetables are especially rich in antioxidants. but all nuts, seeds, whole grains, and beans have them. So replacing meat, dairy, and eggs in your diet is almost guaranteed to boost your antioxidant intake, and this may have a real impact on the risk of depression. So if you're someone who really cares about the environment and fears, oh, I can't know anything more because I'm going to be depressed, by learning more and becoming vegan, you might end up, I mean, I'm not saying it's a silver bullet, being less depressed. Slowly digested carbs are also very good because they enter your bloodstream as glucose. Glucose is a critical source of fuel for your brain and central nervous system, and your body absolutely needs it. And by eating slowly digested carbs, you're getting what you need. Inflammation too. And one plant fat that may be especially valuable, and that's olive oil. So we have a recipe for an olive oil bread, or olive oil cake that's really incredible. So you can have your cake and eat it too. Soybeans contain compounds called isoflavones that are plant estrogens. They aren't exactly the same as their close cousins in the female hormones. But given their likeness to estrogen, it's logical to ask if they might have beneficial effects on depression, since estrogen can help with depression in postmenopausal women. And the evidence is there that yes. 3 supplements important to good mental health: vitamin B12, vitamin D, and pills that provide omega-3 fats, DHA and EPA. So eating to reduce depression and stress because you care about the world. Eat plenty of fruits and vegetables. Use extra virgin olive oil in place of fats from animal foods. And Ginny's talking about that olive oil that when you taste it, it feels like pepper in the back of your mouth. It's really high quality. When you taste it, you know it because you can feel that kind of little kick. Have 1 to 2 servings of soy foods every day if you like them. Take supplements of vitamin D, vitamin B12, and omega-3, and minimize refined grains. Diets can have a powerful effect on mood, but that doesn't mean that it's enough itself to cure depression. Because veganism is related to so many justice issues, it serves as a resource for the resistance. We know that animal activists have had experience with regressive politics. Regressive politics relabels information, represses speech, targets activists as terrorists in the United States at least, which suppresses activism. One of the things that we've learned from a man named Will Potter, who wrote Green is the New Red, was that one reason animal activism got labeled as terrorist and got such a repressive response from the government is it was having an effect. It was changing how people were relating to corporate America, at least. And the corporations didn't like it. They actually helped to write the bill that labels some forms of animal and environmental activism terrorism. We also ended up with ag laws that prevent us from speaking or photographing on factory farms or speaking about what we saw there. So this is repressing speech. In the United States, we have more of that now. So what the government tried out on animal activists is now being used against Black Lives Matter and the protesters of the Dakota Access Pipeline. So traditional acts of nonviolent civil disobedience, among other activities, have now been labeled terrorist. Sometimes you can't do anything more, but if you're a vegan, you're resisting 3 times a day. You can also play with your food. So this is a suggestion of my sister, and this did make it into the book. We have 2 resistance feeds. Drain the swamp kitchen cabinet compost, trumped up vegan cutlets a la orange, tiny little chocolate nut cherry thumbprint candies. Hey, that's worth a laugh. And this one, resistance feeds to stop the wall taco salad bowl with fire and fury salsa and impeach crumble. Okay, thank you. We worked hard on those recipes. Because, you know what? As vegans, we can play with our food. Let's just invite more people in. And I wanted to say about our conversation, our panel, people see, this is a wonderful way of living, and hey, you're going to reduce your social injustice footprint. Look, I'm still angry and frightened and motivated, but now I have a book to share that explains the connections I feel are important to make visible. Our lives are meaningful against injustice, as every day we make meaningful choices. Acting as individuals in decisions about our daily food choices is not immaterial. It's an essential part of resistance. Because every time you choose a vegan meal, you're creating space for justice. So that's Protest Kitchen. And what happens in the kitchen doesn't stay in the kitchen. Thank you.
Starting right here.
Thank you so much for that. I already sang it right because I love you so much. I just kind of I have this issue with kind of calling veganism anything about compassion, because I feel like veganism is mainly about justice. It's compassion is very important, and just sentimentality and you know yourself with anything that's seen as feminized with oh, sentimentality and women and blah 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 weakness. But I do think that it's kind of I feel like it's more of a justice issue, because it's inherently wrong. There's nothing necessary in what we do to animals. There's not a single nutrient that we can't get in plants. Animal protein is inherently toxic for the human body. It's so bad. So the thing is it's just not right. But I'd like your thoughts on that.
So, to summarize, why would I put compassion at the heart of veganism rather than justice? Well, I've been thinking about it as radical compassion, because I think radical compassion is also at the heart of justice. So I don't see them as an either or. I see them are mutually exclusive. I just think there's something about opening our hearts to the lives of others that has compassion acting there. And once we open the heart and we understand the injustice that others are experiencing, the justice, I don't want an inner-outer metaphor where compassion's the inner and justice the outer. I think that is too weak. I think there's a dynamism between them. And that's experiential. So I'm not trying to be definitive here. And so you are welcome to define it that way. I'm not trying to be exclusive. I would say that you can't define veganism as plant-based and leave it at that. It is not that. There is plant-based and fine, be plant-based. But if you are vegan, social justice is a part of veganism.
As a feminized characteristic or feature. And what's really liberating for me in that is that I don't see anything wrong with being feminine. I don't see anything wrong with the idea of embracing compassion as a feminine aesthetic, because there's nothing inherently bad about feminine.
Well, it's very interesting. I'll just put in a plug for this book, Feminist Care Tradition and Animal Ethics, a reader, that my co-author, co-editor Josie Donovan, looked at philosophy in the 18th century, and it had a whole trend of sympathy. And philosophy got to this point where it could have gone rational and rights or sympathy. And we know what it did. Because rights is a very individualistic thing. It's a result of a very limited definition of how humans work, that we're autonomous. And that's something we have in Protest Kitchen, where we're looking at disability activism and this notion of what autonomy is. That autonomy, for many able-bodied people is described as knowing what you want and being able to do it. But autonomy could be described as knowing what it is you desire to have or be. It doesn't mean you have to do it all. So it's a release of this autonomous human notion that is so deeply embedded in rights. And all of that is linked back to this moment in philosophy when it could have gone one or the other, and it did not go for sympathy. Say, and she makes a very interesting point. Why is it that women or animals have to be proven to suffer to get their rights? Because white men just have their rights. Why does suffering suddenly become the issue now to have a right? Which is interesting, because you're then leveraging compassion.
But do you reckon that's like, for example, Tom Reagan, right? Like when he was writing the case for animal rights, like it was very much like
really, we're seeing it as a resource for everybody too. I'll just say, it did not find a British publisher, so if, I'm really not trying to plug this, but if you want it, Houseman's has it now, and they'll probably have it. But it's not going to be in every bookstore because I think British publishers, well, I don't know, I didn't want to touch it. I don't think it was optimism.
Just really quick about like some of the content in the presentation. Like, you know, can you talk a little bit about like the feminizing or the feminization of certain foods? Because like of course when you got this slide encouraging people to eat soy foods, I just almost sense masculine energy in the room, having like something of a moment. And I gotta tell you, as long as I've been eating soy, which is roughly 15 years now, my 8 cups of stubbornly stayed the same size. I haven't grown boobs, I haven't been feminized anyway. I was already gay before I started. So. Not much more that can be done there.
So it's really interesting, because this all goes back to the United States. I was saying that animal activism was having an impact on these corporations, and these corporations responded by trying to limit speech, limit the activism. On the other hand, there was a man in New Zealand, I don't know if I'm going to get all this right, and he started giving soy milk to a parrot or something, and all the feathers fell out, and he started to research. He wasn't a scientist, and he decided that it had to do with feminizing of the soy. And he wrote this little paper, and there is no vested interest by soybean producers to protect soy milk, because it's such a little part of their market. The majority of soybeans, as I said, are going to animals. So there was no vested interest by the soybean companies once that misinformation about feminizing of soy started to get out. And it was like 1996, and there was one foundation, some small foundation, and why engage with them? They were just off doing their thing, except they continued to do it for 20 years. And we now have this whole scare about feminization in soy. And we do have a whole box on why this is wrong. Any study that shows feminization in soy is usually something where the man drank 18 glasses of soy milk, or some huge amount off the charts. But soy has been a part of the lives of many people around the world for many years, and they aren't feminized. Though, as I said, it's actually called, they got feminized by the British government in explaining their defeat through colonialism. But it's just not true. The problem is, how often do you have to say it's not true when you've got a foundation and faulty science just everywhere, and now the right wing embracing the soy boy label?
Is that the long going to do a French version of it?
Of protest pictures?
Right.
I'm sure they'd love to. What would have to happen is a French publisher would have to make a contract and then get a translator.
Because we waited 29 years for that.
No,
I have to
sexual
wait
politics.
29 years.
No, you should write in the publishers of sexual politics and being French.
And like this sort of men more cringe. The idea of like, oh, what if soy milk gives me boobs or something. But like, there's a book by Brian Hughes, which I'm probably sure you know, it's called Brutal, and he sort of explores like this relationship of masculinity and toxic masculinity, like men as abuse examples. And kind of kind of just want to cheekily plug that because it's just great. And I think mentioning it, but I think like when I was listening to your talk, it got me really thinking about how I think a lot of the energy, particularly among men, for example, and I see feminism, it's like it's something that women need to do and need to like be responsible for. But sort of seeing that, it's like actually it can be a really, I'm thinking about what Brian was talking about and stuff, is that actually men taking on veganism and taking on that and seeing, like, embracing a wider experience of humanity, like embracing feminine aspects, embracing like plant food as nurturing, as powerful, can be a really powerful resistance, and a kind of a liberation thing for men who are invested in patriarchy and who are, you know, who obviously benefit from patriarchy, but also are like, as Bell Hooks like says, like psychically tormented by it. And I think that's a really nice thing that I kind of got from that is that, and I'm just kind of saying it for maybe the men who cringe, like you said, is that actually, you know, veganism is really powerful for kind of freeing yourself from, you know, a lot of the kind of oppressive structures that we subscribe to that benefit men that do hurt, you know, everyone as well.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I think liberating men out of the confines of masculinity is a big job, and I think finding all the different ways to do that is really great. I mean, really, when you think about it, why is masculinity being defined as eating a bovine? Is there any more sort of calm, pacific animal than a bovine? And this is masculine? You know, it really already shows that masculinity, I don't know, it's like a bouncing ball. It keeps changing the target as it lands. Because when you deconstruct what meat is, how is that in any way related to strength or courage or masculine traits? I mean, I don't want to reinforce masculinity, but I would like to expose that the masculinity that supposedly vegans derive from meat is false. It's a lie. I mean, I talked this morning about the man thumb. This is a terrible ad for Burger King, how men getting united by meat. And I used to show that and then have change the signs at the end. We wish we'd known about the sexual politics of meat. Hey, we care too, you know, like that there's another way to respond to it instead of saying, oh no, not me. In Texas, what I love to do, I make a vegan barbecue every summer. But I don't push it. I don't, you know, nobody has to know that's what it is. Let them eat it. Let the sensory experience, the bodily experience speak to the mind rather than the mind imposing its reaction.
Let me ask you a question while we're here, while we're talking about like, you know, the ways that like masculinity manifests itself in veganism. What do you think of the labels or the way that people relabel veganism to appeal to a more masculine audience? Like vegan, or like, oh, there's already chuckling in the audience. Good nature chuckling, like, you know, like the ways that we like, you know, we kind of have adopted a sort of bro culture around veganism. What are your thoughts on that? Because I haven't seen it. They're not good.
Well, you know, it's kind of like, how many times do I have to say, could you please read the sexual politics of meat? I mean, ridiculous. If vegan is a word and has a meaning, it's vegan. You can't change it, corrupt it. There's real men eat plants. What's a real man, for heaven's sake? I mean, it's all fungible. So I see that more as the plant-based men. I mean, they need moved to changing it. In the U.S., a lot of these men aren't calling themselves vegans, they're calling themselves plant-based. Okay, but vegan men should not have to be anxious about gender identity. They should be wanting to destabilize gender.
Another question here in the back.
Yeah, bouncing off that and also linking back to what you're saying about how you don't need to be a Trump supporter and be vegan. I wonder if you would go further and say you can't be vegan and, for example, be one of those the white men in veganism who harass women. Like, would you say that they are not vegan because they are not expressing compassion because they're, you know, they're abusers? I wonder if you'd take it that far.
I have no trouble taking it that far. My only concern would be if I was seen as being somehow autocratic. I'd have to first define veganism in such a way that invited everybody who read it to come to that conclusion themselves, rather than being autocratic, you know, and saying, oh, these people are in and these people are out. And that's why I haven't actually written anti-Trump. I mean, you can't be for Trump to be a vegan, because how do you do that in a way that's not setting me as some authority imposing something? But I did get to the point of talking about, especially the HSUS men who Chris Stanton had put on the thing, you know, oh, it was okay for them to look at women's pieces of meat, you know, and they knew what a piece of meat was. That's the outrage there. But I think the most important thing is for all of us to say this single issue veganism has to stop. I mean, you just start there. And then once we have that conversation, everybody gets to be part of the conversation about why reinforcing gender, and why being exploitative of women, and why being racist isn't vegan, because we've all shared the common assumptions about veganism is the social justice impulse activism. So.
Just, we only have a few more minutes before we have to wrap up, but like, just one question I have is that, like, I've noticed that there is a resistance to being identified with a movement for radical justice, that people are afraid of or otherwise turned off by the idea of a radical notion of veganism, which is, to me, like, the original veganism. Yeah, like, so, like, you know, what are your thoughts around that? What are your thoughts about, like, the way that, like, people react to, like, a radical or revolutionary approach to
I think they're trying to protect non-vegans from the radical nature of veganism. It's going to defeat itself. That's where we are. There are so many people saying veganism is this one thing, we've ended up believing it is. And now we have to do a course correction. If we hadn't gone off, would be somewhere else. But I don't want to protect people from the radical nature of veganism. I want them to feel liberated into it. And if it starts with a wonderful plate of vegan food that we're not even naming, I mean, let's be non-logocentric. Let's not think words have to do all the work. After a day of speaking.
Yes, this whole terminology thing is quite fascinating. I mean, just what suddenly came into my mind was Jeremy Corbyn is a vegetarian who has sympathies with veganism. He's got people close to him in his shadow cabinet who are vegan, Chris Williamson, people like that. And yet, I think it's Kerry McCarthy, who's a long-standing committed vegan, quit his shadow cabinet over the issue of the renewal of Trident nuclear submarines, you know, which and it's just absolutely bewildering for me how somebody who goes on campaigns against the badger cull and stuff like that is also pro spending billions on nuclear weapons. Does that mean that we can't call her, she said we can no longer call her a vegan? I'm just not, you know, she's yeah.
Oh, I call Carrie a vegan? Okay, so wait, maybe I need to back up. Him being for Trident and she's against it, but isn't that good?
She was in
right, I know who she is.
Yeah, she was for the renewal of Trident.
Oh, I see.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Because ecofeminism, we now have, you know, we're talking about intersectional veganism, and I told you, I think that's a problematic term and it misunderstands the history of intersection. But there was a term that could have been used all these years, and it's ecofeminist vegan. which is exactly social justice, recognizing interconnected oppressions. But ecofeminism says, or ecofeminism begins as a contextual ethic, that how I speak about something here might be different from how I speak about it in the US, which might be different from how I speak about it in Mexico. I have to be sensitive to what the context is. So I would say that it's for the vegans of the UK to write about and figure that out. And say, here's what's problematic here, and here's great respect for all that Carrie's done, and here's the problematics from a vegan philosophical perspective. And just liberate all of you to situate your veganism and social justice together and see what conversations come out here in Great Britain. So I think maybe that is a great empowering moment to end.
Thank you so much.